Better late than never. Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 22, and chapter 29, verses 1 through 13. Jacob made a bad name and a bitter life for himself when he misled his father in Genesis chapter 27, verse 35, and maddened his brother, Genesis chapter 27, verse 45. The first act of deception in the Bible was not committed by the serpent in Genesis chapter 3, verse 13, but by Jacob, Genesis chapter 27, verse 35. The Hebrew text technically used the word beguiled for the serpent's actions and deceived for Jacob's. The conniving, selfish Jacob appeared to be tossing his troubles away, but he was just taking his problems elsewhere and transferring them to other people. Jacob's mother sent him 500 miles away to Haran, where her brother lived. Why is a changed life better late than never? How do people change from the errors of their ways? What hope is there for cold, calculative, and crooked people like Jacob? First, comprehend God's providence to you. Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 15. God works in mysterious, marvelous, and miraculous ways. Jacob's ladder was God's brief disclosure of his active involvement in the world, his avid interest in human affairs, and his astute intervention into people's lives. Jacob had no company but the sun for his trip, no place but the ground for his body, and no pillow but a stone for his head. But he experienced God's peace in a personal and poignant way. The door at home to his family and to Beersheba were slammed, but the window of heaven was wide open to him. For a preview and peek, God made apparent, available, and accessible his presence, promise, and providence to Jacob in a powerful and positive way. God confirmed to Jacob his destiny as the heir of God's promise made to his forefathers, to his descendants, and to the world. God had made the contact with the patriarch, but the change was up to Jacob. God did not force a change in Jacob's life through a great glorious appearance, but he gave Jacob the opportunity and option to make things right for himself and others. Second, change your perspective of life. Genesis chapter 28, verses 16 through 22. The transformed Jacob made a vow to change. He was the first person in the Bible to make a vow in verse 20 and called God my God in verse 21. But his vow was not designed to manipulate or manage God anymore. God's promise to Jacob was unconditional in verse 15. God promised to give the land to Jacob in verse 13. But Jacob settled for the food to eat and clothes to wear in verse 20. Mercy and not merit was on Jacob's lips. Survival and simplicity, and not success and strength, were what he sought. Peace and not possessions was his priority. More importantly, for better or for worse, the fleeing Jacob vowed to return to the promised land. True to his word, Jacob resided in Bethel upon his return to Canaan. Bethel was indeed God's shelter and sanctuary to his family, a place of refuge, rest, and recovery. Genesis chapter 31, verses 12 through 13, Genesis chapter 35, verses 1 through 3. To his credit, Jacob was the first person in the Bible to conceive of a house of worship, to build the house of God, in verses 17 and 22. Third, care for others before self. Genesis chapter 29, verses 1 through 11. The new Jacob was real, reliable, and respectful. He gently addressed strangers as my brothers, in Genesis chapter 29, verse 4. Politely asked about his uncle and earnestly interacted with the locals. The transformation was refreshing and rewarding. Most of all, he was helpful and humble. On his own, Jacob went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep in verse 10. For a change, he readily helped strangers, without being asked, worked for free without expectations, and wept without his mother's coaching. Jacob, who was distant to his brother and his father, cried at the discovery of a relative. Relationships were now more important to him now than riches. Previously, only his brother Esau wept in Genesis chapter 27, verse 38. But presently, the hardness and haughtiness of heart in Jacob broke like a flood. The transformation of Jacob was not complete, but it was off to a credible start. From now on, Jacob's priorities were God first, family, and others next, and himself last. In conclusion, have you truly received Jesus Christ into your heart and confessed him as Lord and Savior? Do you know him as the creator of heaven and earth, the mediator between God and man, the salvation of the Jews and the Gentiles? Won't you turn from your sin turn to Him and turn your life around. Has your selfishness, self-importance, and self-righteousness become a stumbling block and a sore point to others? Let us make amends and mend fences with people in our lives.